I feel the wind, silent snow. The world is frozen and moon is full. I feel the wind, silent snow. Am I just lost here? Can't find my way home. Home feels like it's drifted so far away. Feels like a million miles away. I can't find my way back through the night, through the skies of blinding white. Bring me home to find my dreams, to bring me right back from the edge. Give me warmth to survive this night, to keep me right off of the edge. My blood flows cold, the darkest dreams, and yet somehow I'm still alive. The mistake I made was to stay in the place that keeps me fighting for my life.
What's up, fam? It's been a while since I've been able to do one of these, and I want to see, I'm trying something new this time, so for those of you that are out there watching this thing, let me know in the chat if I need to mess with the volume a little bit or make any changes to that, because I'm trying something to try to decrease my CPU load a bit, especially since I'm going to talk about a quadra-bajillion projects here in a minute. And it's super annoying now the way that you have to do this stream so that I can get it everywhere that I want to get it. But I'm doing it. I'm living it. It's good. What's that Ariana Grande thing? She's living it. She's loving it. Whatever. That's McDonald's. That's not Ariana Grande. I don't know. Maybe Ariana Grande really likes McDonald's. I couldn't tell you, but it's been a minute since I've been able to spend some time doing a mix breakdown and talking a bit about what's going on. I'm trying at this point to, I want to run through some of the project. It's because, man, I realized when I was looking through everything today as I did the release yesterday for My Blood Flows Cold, that I haven't done a mix breakdown in a long time. And especially over the past couple of weeks, everything got so much more complex in what I was trying to do. And so what I try to do on these mixed breakdown sessions is I like to talk at least a little bit about what the process was for songwriting, what the inspirations were, and I like to show a little bit of the music nerd stuff, because I know for me, I went through a 10-year hiatus where I wasn't creating music, where I wasn't getting things done, where things weren't working. And I know for me, a lot of the problem is that I had started on hardware workstations. I was working on a big, massive Korg Triton, originally Korg Triton Studio, and I have a Korg Triton Extreme. And so I was used to working on hardware. And so for me, that was a very restrictive environment. And what I've come to find out about those environments that makes them so interesting is that restriction definitely breeds creativity. If you're in a certain environment and you have certain limitations, a lot of times that really helps with creativity. Now, and I used to work with a guy who used to have this quote that I really liked about this topic, because what he used to say all the time was, to think outside the box, you have to understand first why the box exists and why some people like living in the box, and why some people want to defend the box and understand it. I don't present these things from like I'm a production genius or that I even do these things right. I don't necessarily know that there's a right or a wrong way to do things. As long as your mix doesn't sound like garbage, it probably helps you for what you're doing. But that said, I know that, you know, for me, I just like to talk a little bit about the process, about what I've done, kind of show some of the eccentricities in the song that you might not have listened to. If you like this, first and foremost, regardless of where you're watching this, please like, subscribe, share. If you haven't checked out thesilencenoise.com and you want to hear all the songs that we're going to talk about today and all the songs in the history of the silencenoise.com, in the history of the Silence Noise Project, visit thesilencenoise.com. Well, the recent history of the Silence Noise Project, I should say, because there's a whole 15-year history that I got to figure out what to do with in the near future. But I like to talk about this music nerd stuff. So, and I also want this to be interactive. If there's something that I'm covering that you're like, what on earth are you talking about? Or you want clarification on it, I'm in the chat room and all the places I'm streaming right now. So, you know, just let me know what you like and what you're interested in. But please like, subscribe, share. Even more so, if you really dig this stuff, you can listen to it on your preferred music streaming service. So the Silence Noise tracks, normally the way that it works, and that I've been trying to do it, and this may actually be bumped out a little more. I'll explain why. But what I've been doing is I participate in a songwriting group where the goal is to write a song every week, which is why over the past 4 months I've been so prolific in the songwriting sense. Because the goal has been to produce a song every week. I have accountability. I have other people. And in fact, I collaborated with one of the guys this week who did a killer solo for My Blood Flows Cold that we'll show off in a minute here and what I did with it to make it work for our purpose, because it didn't necessarily come in perfect shape. So I want to talk about those things, but please, again, check us out. Spotify, Google Play Music, YouTube Music, Deezer, my favorite, Napster. If you have a Napster account and you can listen to the Silence Noise on Napster and just tell me, I don't know who the hell has a Napster account, but I would really like to know who has a Napster account. So if you're the person out there, because look, I was the guy that had the Zune. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I was the guy that thought Zune was way ahead of its time. So this is an old man rant, and I don't care. Zune was way ahead of its time. It was great hardware. They were Spotify before there was Spotify. But each one of those plays, each one of those shares is super helpful to us. Add to a playlist, even better. If you really like it, listen to us more often. But please just let people know about this. Obviously, I market it too, but really helps us, really helps get subscribers. As you can see, I'm not taking this on and, you know, stacking a bajillion subscribers or doing anything silly to get this done, but I like to talk about music nerd stuff. And so, without further ado, again, like, subscribe, share thesilencenoise.com to hear everything you want. You can also buy the tracks there. I don't have any merch. In fact, I want to partner at some point with a visual artist. I haven't talked about this a lot, but I'm like the least visual human being in the world. It's really challenging. You know, I've actually, with the amount of video that I've had to produce over the past couple of weeks, which is not necessarily my strength or my skill set or my favorite thing to do, but I've been doing it. It's necessary. If you're going to be a music artist these days, you have to have your YouTube videos strong. You have to have your presence going. And so even in my not the greatest way in the world way, I'm doing it. But I would love to promote any visual artists out there or people out there who want to play and want to partner up. We should talk about that. But let's talk about some music nerd stuff. So I realized that the last time that we had done one of these song breakdowns, I love how I immediately watch my computer performance. The second that I go over to my music software, it like spikes up. So I'm gonna do the best I can to get through this. The way I was doing it before with the plugin, my computer is pretty powerful, but apparently it's not powerful enough to do the streaming and then have all the plugins loaded and all the stuff that I need to show off the music. Apparently that is stretching things a little bit, but that's fine with me. I would like to stretch things a little bit. And so our first track that we're going to get into is a track, called Washed Up. In fact, I was playing My Blood Flows Cold, so that's the track that I was in. And so just as a reminder for people when I talk about these things, if you have questions, ask in the chat. I use a digital audio workstation, or my audio program is called Reaper. That's the program that I use for what I'm doing. Actually, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to get rid of one of my screen caps. Let's see if that makes things a little better at least. Yeah. That looks like that cleared things up a little bit for us. Maybe it just didn't like having the two screen captures open at once. That seemed to be really choking it up. Gotcha. So trying to do things to decrease my computer See, those are words. Those are good words right there. And I'm keeping an eye on the chats. Just keep those open. But the first thing I want to talk about is Washed Up. Actually, you know what? I want to have my themes up here, which I'm terrible about right now. So let's load those up so I can talk about it, because I'm talking about so many songs, I can't even remember what all the themes were. But the premise of the song group that I'm in, which is reddit.com /r for subreddit /song a week, with a lot of the people that are in here, they give you a theme each week. It's kind of like a creative writing group is the best way to think about it. It's a creative writing group for songwriters that's really focused on, you know, being supportive and helping people get their songs done, get their material done. And for me, it's been probably the biggest thing I've ever done in my creative life, to take on that level of accountability and to have, you know, support and people that I know are going to listen to the tracks each week. And it's really gotten me to a level of productivity that I'm surprised by. Washed Up, I'm pretty sure, is Distortion. I just want to make sure before I do that, and I say that it's correct, which I'm pretty sure it is. Yes, Distortion. So Washed Up, the theme of the week was Distortion. For me, distortion is something that I use in virtually everything that I do. So asking me to do distortion was something super easy, but I wanted to do something more creative with it, because most of the time when you think of distortion or you think of saturation, you think of electric guitars, or you think of, you know, maybe slapping that on a bass, or maybe doing something like that. But for the most part, what people think about when they think about that stuff is electric guitar. And so I wanted to take this and really forge it into an electronic format. This is one of the other things I've been doing. For those of you who want a little bit extra, or you want to kind of see inside my brain a little bit while I'm thinking about these tracks or the musical inspirations, because I love music. I've always been a music nerd. I was a DJ for a long time. And so for me, one of the things that I love about this whole process is kind of feeding in and realizing where my inspirations came from, or what things made the most sense for what I was doing. And one of the things that definitely had a huge impact on me was this playlist that I put together. It's on Spotify. You can find it on the silencenoise.com. It's called Silence Noise Inspirations. And so what I did is I took a lot of the tracks that were the inspirations, or the reference tracks even. Some of these tracks I used as reference tracks while I was mixing these songs. And for those of you who don't know what a reference track is and you're watching this, when you're developing a song, you want to have some sort of song that you're listening to, or some sort of track that you're listening to that gets you familiar with the sound you're going for. Because one of the things that happens in this process of developing a song a week, I will literally listen to a song maybe 1,000 times during that week. And that's not even a crazy amount compared to like mix engineers who do this for a living, and people that do this every single day, and like that's their passion and that's their job. People who do this every single day, they probably listen to it 10,000 times. You listen to it, and it's funny, I'll actually show it off the way that I do it, because for me, what's interesting is I have my nice little mix headphones that I use right here. These are Audio Technica. Let me give you the exact model, because I always get the model number wrong. It's M40Xs, I believe. Where is it on these? Of course, let's look stupid. Yeah, there it is. They're the Audio Technica M40Xs. The M50Xs are nice ones. Cool thing about these is that these are pretty budget headphones. They're pretty budget conscious. You can find pairs of them, especially used pairs of them, for pretty cheap now. But so a lot of my mixing starts there. I also have studio monitors that are right here. I have JBL 305s, which are up here. So they're two red ones. I kind of can't show them off. Otherwise, I'd be pointing the camera right into the direct bright light, which you wouldn't be able to see anything anyway, which probably wouldn't be all that interesting. But then the other thing that I do is I listen to each one of these mixes on multiple pairs of speakers and multiple sets of headphones. So I have my little JBL Bluetooth speaker. So you'll notice that all this stuff is very close by for me to reference and use. So I got my little JBL Bluetooth speaker. This thing really likes to overcompensate on the bass. So when I'm playing it, this speaker is very bass heavy. So if my mix or the track itself is super bass heavy when I'm mixing it, it sounds horrible coming through this, or it'll rattle this thing off the table. Then I have this pair of, I don't even know, these are AKG earbuds, I believe. Yeah, they are AKG earbuds that are right here. I'll spend a shift mixing on these. So again, to change up the perspective of what I'm hearing throughout those many listens, to hear like when I'm listening to them in different listening environments, how does that sound? So there's these little headphones, and then this is the coup de grace. These are my secret weapon right here. So these headphones right here, these little purple earbuds right here, they came with my Roku One. So they're extremely high quality earbuds that I have right here. They sound like absolute crap, which makes them even better for this purpose, so that you can hear them. You can hear the song and the mix and the elements again in a very terrible pair of earbuds. And then the other thing I do a lot of the time, I have a Galaxy Note 8. I will listen to the mix or to the song just coming out of the speaker on the headphone, which again, I know a lot of people are not, it's not going to sound good when it's coming through that, but the purpose isn't necessarily to sound good. The purpose is to hear. A lot of times once it sounds in a place where I feel like it's pretty good on the headphones, in general, it sounds okay in the other environments, but things happen. The big things that happen when you're putting these songs together that are really killer is like you get ear fatigue, or you get tired, or you lose impartiality. That's the other thing you'll hear a lot from people that do this for a living, is once you've heard a song 100 bajillion times, you start to lose, you start to gain a bias towards it, or you start to hear things that aren't there. It starts to like haunt you sometimes, where you'll hear things and you'll be like, was that really there? Is it really this bad? You'll make adjustments for the sake of making adjustments, or I shouldn't say you, I will make adjustments for the sake of making adjustments. You know, I'll just screw things up because I don't really know what else I'm doing. So all of those things that I just mentioned, the crappy earbuds, the AKGs, the Bluetooth speaker, the cell phone speaker, my studio monitors, all these different environments help me hear the mix a different way every single time. And the cool thing about that, again, is when I can hear the mix every single time, then that way I know that it sounds good in multiple environments. And then I have one more setup in general that I listen to. Downstairs I have like a home theater system that a lot of times I'll listen to the mix on. I don't know how I got into this state. Probably because as I'm digging into these songs and I'm talking about decisions that I made, a lot of those decisions in particular came from wanting certain songs or certain sounds to sound better in different environments. I went down a foxhole here, but I like to teach. For those of you who haven't noticed this, I do it for a living anyway, but I like to make sure that those of you who are like, what are you talking about, understand what I'm talking about. So those are my references. That's the gear sheet. For those of you who care about gear that I use to make these songs, I'm happy to talk about that in future videos, or talk about what I'm using. I mentioned it in previous videos a little bit, but not as much in this one. So let's talk about Washed Up. Washed Up was a song that was featuring distortion. That was the purpose of the song, was distortion. And so for those of you who have never heard this, here's a little sample of the beginning of Washed Up.
Are you too washed up? Have you wondered where time escaped? Are you too held up?
So we'll do our first little breakdown piece right there, because the thing that drives this song, and that was the most interesting to me as I was writing and producing it, was there's distortion on virtually everything that shows up in this track. And in particular, my favorite part, or the most notable part, and you can kind of hear it, but you can hear it even more when we solo it and when we focus on that track, is exactly what's going on with the drums. And the drums in particular on this have multiple levels of effects and distortion that are happening. I'm gonna pull my bug off the screen, see if that helps a little bit. So there's multiple levels of distortion that are going on in all of the different levels of this track, but in particular the drums here are probably the biggest one where the most is going on. So if I solo them, let's just take a listen to what's going on there. So on these, there's actually multiple things that I was doing. And the other thing that happened as these tracks were going on is a lot of my production technique started leveling up as I was going through what I was doing. And of course, as I said, I don't say this as like, I am the greatest mix engineer, I know everything about this. I don't say that. But I also know that I learned things that worked and didn't work. And in particular, the drum beat on this one was super experimental, what I was trying to work with, and trying to create a sound. The reference track for this, which is also referenced in the playlist that I mentioned about inspirations, was a 9 Inch Nails track that's called Satellite, which had some very interesting distorted drums going on in it. Obviously, Trent Reznor of 9 Inch Nails is a master of creating unique sounds and sound design, and especially using distortion in all those different tracks, which is something he does super duper well. And so for me, I was trying to emulate that Reznor feel as much as I could. And so, you know, again, when you just listen to the drums, so you can clearly hear the distortion when it's there. When the rest of the track is in, there's so many other levels of distortion that are going on at that point that it definitely can cause some, like it buries that distortion and the eccentricity of that distortion a little bit. You can't hear it as much. But let's take a look at the FX bus that I have set up here. So to create that sound, obviously there's Reactor, which I'm using Reactor as an effect plugin. So Reactor comes with Native Instruments Complete. I mentioned this before, that Native Instruments is the complete set is pretty much what I use to write almost everything that I write at this point. And so a lot of the effect is created by this plugin that's called Molecular, which is kind of a delay, and it has a variety of different effects in it that you can put in different orders to explore. And when this is running, you can kind of see that it's running, it morphs between different effects. So what's interesting about this and how it was able to create that is it's leveraging delay, and it's leveraging some of these kind of dual synthy effects and things to create that sound. That's pretty interesting. And then that in and of itself is running through another distortion pedal plugin, which is called Driver, which is set to the lovely preset setting of Fart, which I know a lot of you probably have been waiting to hear fart sounds in your music. And so, you know, that obviously fits very well in what we're talking about here. And then it's EQ'd very tactically, because without that EQ, if we play it without the EQ, this sounds like a giant mess, and how it goes through. So if we listen to it this way, then we remove the EQ. We put the EQ back. You'll notice one of the big shifts that happens when we turn that EQ on and off there is that that EQ is really taming the low end on that, because with distortion, especially the distortion that I used on this, the distortion really takes over the entirety of the track. Like, it's difficult to hear anything else once that distortion is running. And so it was really important to get the EQ at a place where I had the ability to tame it and mix it in with the rest of the track. So we're doing that with EQ to get that sound the way we want it. So you got that there. And then let's roll up and move to the chorus of this, because this song is a bit simpler than some of the other songs that I'm going to discuss this week, where there isn't quite as much going on with each one. But in this one, you know, there's definitely distortion that's running through. The bass on this track is a synth bass, so normally on a lot of these tracks I'm playing live bass. This track in particular, I'm not playing live bass, so this one is synth bass generated. So if we just listen to that for a second, just to get a feel for that.
Is obscured by today. The future is just in front of your feet. The future is a ticking clock away. The future future is just beyond your doubt.
So guitar that's going on there is live guitar for sure. I intentionally made it really dirty in this track. So the guitar in this track is really kind of filthy sounding. In what we've got here, it is not, I designed it to be a little bit higher than you would hear in a lot of the other silence noise tracks that I would do. But it's intentionally designed to get really rough and ugly. So if we listen to this.
Is just in front of your feet. The future is a ticking clock away. The future is just beyond your doubt.
So one of the things that you'll notice across most of these is because I was working with distortion so much on these, and there's distortion, there's a lot of noise gates assigned throughout this, because in a lot of these the goal was to make the noise sound good, but I didn't want the noise to be so out of control that it took over the entirety of the mix, which would be something that's really, really easy to do, again, in a song with as much distortion as this song has. And so this song just continued to have so much distortion throughout it that it was really important and critical that I keep that distortion controlled. The bigger other thing, probably the only other thing I'd focus on solo on this track that's interesting is there's a vocal mesh that comes in with a lot of distorted vocals, and you'll see crazy effects in here. This one's kind of a silly effect, so let's listen to it in the mix.
Are you too messed up? Have you witnessed how everything collapsed? Are you too messed up? Do you wish you had something more to hate? When did you...
So again, with that, same thing that's happening right there. Effects created by Molecular. So there's different levels. It's moving between various effects like a synthesizer, as if I were playing a synthesizer effect with it. And it's a subtle effect. It's something that you'll notice, or you might hear, especially if you're listening to it on the crappy earbuds that I talked about, on the Roku Secret Weapon earbuds. You would really notice how pronounced that effect is. And maybe depending on what you're watching this on now, you can hear that effect, but it really stands out. And again, it's something that could easily get obnoxious if I were leaving it super loud throughout, but I wanted it to be there. I wanted the kind of dirty feel of what we were doing and the noise to really come across there. And so, you know, again, it's there, but it's subtle. Oops.
Are you too messed up? Have you witnessed how everything collapsed? Are you too bruised up? Do you wish you had something?
Same thing on these backup tracks that we have showing up later here. You know, just lots of goofy distortion and goofy effects on these backup vocals.
It lingers on and on and on and on and on and on and on. It lingers on and on and on and on and on and on and on. It lingers on and on and on and on.
That's got a really beautiful effect that you could tell. And this one, as I said, was a story of, it's a story of making lots of crazy noises, which I like. And again, this is where the Reznor reference track was really helpful. The Nine Inch Nails reference track was really helpful in that it's easy to just make a shit ton of noise and not pay attention to what's happening there. But in this case, had I turned this up too loud, like let's listen to it this way. Let's listen to it in the mix.
It lingers on and on and on and on and on and on and on. It lingers on and on and on and on.
So you can hear how distracting that is at a level where it's too loud. And so in this case, taming it, keeping all those things tame, there was a lot of discretion that went into creating this song in terms of I wanted it to have that power. I wanted it to be in that, you know, it was very important to me that it have lots of noise and that it be dirty and ugly throughout most of it, but also in a way that was tame enough to where no one independent noise other than the noise I wanted at that time would be taking over the track entirely, which is really important.
The future is obscure.
Other thing that happens at the end of this track is basically every part throughout the song comes back. So we go through this ebb and flow where you get pieces of what's going to happen at the end of the track going on throughout the track, and then at the end, from a songwriting perspective, I wanted it to come back in, and I wanted all the pieces that you'd heard and all the effects throughout what you had heard to really be featured in the end of the track. And what was interesting about that being featured in the track this way is, for the most part, the end of the song was kind of written and mixed first, because I had to have a plethora of effects that would sound decent together and not sound terrible in what was being done there. And so it was really important to have effects that worked and meshed well together in this climax of the song. So you notice all the instruments come back in. I'm really going to start it where the drums come in. And the one other thing that's added is there's an instrument here which I very cleverly labeled sweep at end. So sweep at end is there, and there's a little bit of a sweep that's added in at the end when all the effects come back into play. So the vocals to me are really actually the highlight of the song, and you know, really I think of myself as a vocalist first, so probably not super surprising that the vocals are at the center of things. But the level of depth I wanted to create with the vocals, to me, again, kind of felt very signature Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails feel, especially, which was going on in the reference track of what I was hearing here. But there's so much going on in the vocals if you just listen to them together.
Future is a ticking clock away. The future is beyond your doubt. The future is
really tried to do some fun things with pan there as well. So you have a really distorted, yelly vocal in the one ear, and then in the other ear you have a much bigger, sweepy sound that's going on behind what's happening there. But again, trying to keep it interesting, really trying, every track in this has some form of distortion. The primary distortion I used on this was driver. One of the things that I realized about this track as I look back at it, since this track was actually created, oh man, the beginning of September, so it's actually been that long since I've done one of these breakdowns. I really wasn't using Guitar Rig 5 at this point for anything other than guitars and basses, which is something that in the future tracks has really changed, because Guitar Rig 5 has some phenomenal delays and reverb effects in it that I'm really digging for clean vocals and for some of the effects that I create in the future songs. But at this song, I really focused on using driver. It's a really simple approach to make as much controlled noise as I could possibly make and try to tie it together into some sort of cohesive something, which is really what happened in the end here. So let's move on from that. That's washed up. If you haven't heard it, I'm not going to save that. So if you haven't heard that again, check out all the songs. They're here on the channel if you want to check them out, or thesilencenoise.com. You can search for that. All the songs other than this week's song, My Blood Flows Cold, are up on the music services, so Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, wherever. Napster, check it out on Napster. Everyone get a Napster subscription, bros. Let's see some Napsters. If you, I seriously want to know who's listening to the Silence Noise music on Napster. I can tell you, me in 2000 would have been bumping the Silence Noise on Napster. All right, let's talk about the next song. And I'm going to keep with this for as long as I can, but I might divide this up because I realize we're already a half an hour, because I wanted to talk about a bunch of other stuff, because that's what I do, because I like to talk, if you haven't noticed. But let's talk about a few of the other things. So let's move on to Factory of Hope. This moves back more into my traditional style. I know I did a previous breakdown at some point. I'm pretty sure I did a breakdown. I'll look at my YouTube real quick. I'm pretty sure I've done a breakdown of My Feet in the Mud. If I haven't, I want to come back and do it. Factory of Hope, in some ways, even though it was only a couple weeks later, is a bit of a spiritual sequel to My Feet in the Mud for me. It's something that, even as I was writing it, I realized the feel with the piano and the strings and the various pieces that were in this track felt very similar. So much so that at the end, I added a callback to My Feet in the Mud, both lyrically and in the song, that we can talk about a little bit here. Coming into this track, I know since this track was, again, kind of beginning of September, I definitely was, again, getting to a place where I felt a lot more confident in my mixes. One of the other things that came in really big here is there was a special that was running in early September for Ozone Elements, which is a plugin from Isotope. For those of you who haven't heard of it, I'm pretty sure that giveaway may still be going on at Plugin Boutique. But Isotope is kind of the leader in EQ and mastering plugins. And so this was the week that I started using Ozone Elements to get more of a mastered feel. Now, I am not a professional anything. I'm not a professional mixer. I'm not a professional mastering engineer. I am just someone that likes to write songs, and everyone on SoundCloud has their stuff up so freaking loud, and really everywhere nowadays, that you almost have to have some sort of loudness in your mix to even be able to compete a little bit, which is really important. So I really wanted to compete in this sense, and so this is something that's helped me do that. It also adds some complexity to what we're doing here. This is a complex song, as you can see from what we've got here, both from a track perspective, but really, you know, one of my favorite elements in music, and I talk about this all the time, are string sections. I don't know anyone that plays the strings other than family members who don't play on my tracks, but for me, someday that's a big dream of mine, is to have more live strings in what I'm doing. And so really the goal when I'm using synth strings or when I'm using synth orchestras is to get close enough. So my goal is to get as close as I possibly can to being able to get a sound that's workable and that can blend into the mix well. If you solo the strings out a lot of the time, and I notice this, and just listen to the strings alone, a lot of time what you'll hear is that it isn't, you know, there's elements of it that don't necessarily sound, at least in my opinion, that realistic. Now, you know, I could spend days programming all these things and trying to get them right, but I don't have that kind of time. And Song a Week, this is one of the limitations. I have to get the song out by the end of the week. A lot of times I learn about the theme on Wednesday or Thursday, and I want to have the song essentially in production by Tuesday, so that way I can basically do the release. And I'm getting faster as time has gone on. It used to take me all the way till like midnight of the Wednesday before, but now it's definitely moving a lot faster. But this song really is a complex piece. For me, the strings are kind of the highlight of it, but there's also a ton going on vocally. But for those of you who have ever listened to My Feet in the Mud, you'll realize right away what a kind of spiritual successor this is.
Dreams in the machine. Dreams in...
So there's some interesting pitch shifting going on in the vocals here. So notice lots of vocal effects. I could probably layer these on separate tracks, but in a lot of different parts I like to treat things differently. You'll notice that I have this track in here called Weird Tune. So the way this is working is both there's a high and low part that are here. And then these are both bussed into this weird tune. So what it means is these two signals are running into this track, which has a pitch effect on it. And so I'm using repitch to turn the pitch down, which creates this kind of weird, not earthly tone to what's happening in the vocals right here.
Dreams in the machine.
So obviously I can't sing that low, and I didn't want it to sound natural. My goal with what I was trying to do there was to create something that was kind of otherworldly sounding. Like it's a little weird, it's a little just odd, but with the rest of the track, especially when the strings come in, that feeling really fits. So when we get in and we start listening to when the strings come in, kind of has an unnerving element to it, which is something that I really wanted to create there, is something that sounds kind of odd. So in this, I did use the twill effect in the string section to be able to create the string sound. I actually regret it I will probably, if I ever remaster the song, go back and change it, or if I ever do realize and start recording with someone that does actual strings, because I wanted something here. This feels a little bit over the top, but again, given the limitations, I had to roll with it. See that? Feels a little bit too... I don't know. I didn't like it. I'm supposed to like these songs. They're my songs, and I'm like, I don't like that piece. I don't really love that piece that much. I would make a different decision in the future. But I did want something that created some suspense and created some interest before moving into the next part, which just goes pretty much traditional rock after that. So we move into a very traditional rock sound from here.
My dreams are in a machine, downloading home.
All right, so one thing that's going on in these tracks is I have an acoustic guitar that's playing in here. My acoustic guitar sounds like crap right now. It totally needs new strings, and I have not been able to get new strings. So I did play the part on acoustic guitar, and it sounds like trash. So I left part of it while I was there, but I really buried it in the mix because I wanted to pick up the strum noise mostly from it, but it doesn't sound very good on its own. So if you listen to that alone, here's my embarrassing things that get tucked into mix with the silence noise. I'm not even a great guitarist to begin with. That is just a nasty sounding guitar part that I don't like in any way. However, what I did like about it as I was hearing it, and what stands out to me, is the strum, the way that it fits into the mix actually sounds pretty nice.
In a machine, downloading home.
So it creates kind of a nice percussive element that's going on behind it that I really like. Whoops, let's not do that. Let's not open Cortana for everyone to hear, but it creates a nice little percussive drive that keeps everything going forward, which is really what I was looking for in that. And so I left it in, but turned very low.
Life from a tablet of a man to whom I will read.
Piano is the giant mixed with the grandeur, both native instrument sounds.
Lost in a wave of technology.
Notice that both guitars are still here. The acoustic is still here, and I actually keep it behind almost everything. It's still there just for the deep strum noise.
Lost in a wave of technology. Dead to the world outside of me. Living in a cold blue blue.
All right, so this part for me, this string part in the middle, is very challenging. Is a very challenging part to write and get to sound where I wanted it to sound. I don't know music theory. I tell people this all the time. I'm not a formally trained musician. The furthest extent I have for random silence noise trivia, for those of you who want to know this, my very first instrument, as Crystal Furton, who is my friend on Facebook, would attest, was I was a flute player in middle school, and then our school's budget got cut and the band program got cut, and so that was the extent of my music theory training. I pretty much lost all of it. I have a number of incredibly talented musicians and people in my family that do this stuff for a living, so I've been around a lot of it, and I've been influenced by a lot of that sound. Strings and music have always been very important to me, especially in mine for the type of dynamic I'm trying to create with the silence noise. But in this, trying to create a really nice dynamic string part that sat comfortably enough behind the vocals and could drive the track the way I wanted to was difficult.
I can't breathe. I need air.
And so the interesting thing again about this part is that this part, when you solo it out, doesn't really sound like a double bass or like a cello to the degree you'd want to. Like synth string sounds as much as you push, and I know there are some people who are wizards with this stuff, who can push strings to sound perfectly real with this stuff. To me, they always sound a little synthetic, and this sounds a little synthetic when it's soloed. I try to give it a lot of bow noise. To me, that just makes it sound at least a little more realistic, but it's probably over the top. But the decisions one makes when putting these songs together.
My eyes are so tired, I can't believe with all of...
So in this, when you listen to it with that, it almost sounds like a bass part, which is what I really wanted. And as you can see, there is no actual bass being played during that. So just solo strings that are playing throughout that piece, and that are going through there to lead us to the big
information that I still don't know how to live. I can't breathe. I need it.
One thing you'll probably notice about a lot of my songs that's really critical to me is there's almost always a build. And I always I like to sneak elements in and bring them back later in the track and later in what I'm doing. This track in particular, I do that to the point, as I mentioned, where I bring in stuff from another song as time goes on. There's stuff that comes on from, My Feet in the Mud. But really in this, it's about bringing all of the various elements together.
I can't breathe. I need air. I can't see. My eyes are so tired.
And then just before the final break, there's a fun little callback to My Feet in the Mud. The reason why the key changes at the end.
So much, but
it was done with a pitch bend, just simple pitch bend done manually to bring it back into a similar key to My Feet in the Mud, so we could do that part and end it. So the biggest thing with this track, as I'm breaking it down, this is pretty straightforward outside of the string parts, which again are not, classical music oriented string parts. I would certainly love to gussy them up at some point if I had a musician that was doing that with me. But pretty straightforward rock song, pretty straightforward with the guitar and bass, with the additions of the piano and strings. Again, driven by vocals, which is kind of the big thing for me. Spiritual successor to My Feet in the Mud. And really, as I was pointing out, the strings and the dynamics on the strings are the most important thing to me in this track, which they're featured very heavily, and to the point where there's even a break where that's all that's going on, are the low string, high string, and vocals. And so, again, Factory of Hope, just like the other songs, available on all the music services, on the silencenoise.com, but hopefully that gives you an interesting thing. And if you're watching this, either in the chat or in the replay, and you've made it this far, please, if you have questions or you're like, hey, I want to hear something about that, or you want to know something about how something was created, feel free to ask that. I probably won't need to spend as much time on some of these. Like this one is very much about pretty much straightforward songwriting. So that's Factory of Hope. I'm not going to do that. So let's talk about Let's Go to War. For some reason, this song has been my biggest song on Spotify. I think somebody somewhere, and I don't know how this happened, added this to a Spotify playlist. So thank you very much, whoever did that, because for whatever reason, that has drawn out some Spotify listeners for me. It is, as I said, my most listened to track on Spotify. Not sure why. I do love this song. This song, again, very straightforward. There is some play in this with sounds that I'll talk about when we start at the beginning. In particular, I really wanted to play around with some choir sounds. I hadn't necessarily found anything at this point from a choir perspective that I found super interesting that's going on in here, but we'll listen to that. There's also, yes, the end of this song. One of the things about this song to me that I enjoy, just from a stylistic perspective, which is something I do often in my songs, is this song, I destroy it at the end. And so I destroy this at the end, and it goes from being, this kind of very aggressive song to kind of falling apart. Like, I envision it as manic energy that's really built up, manic, and then it kind of crumbles at the end of it, which is very intentional, and it crumbles into some, again, controlled noise similar to Washed Up. So similar techniques I was doing right there. And that is how it sounds. So The other thing on this song is I really went for big drums. I spent a lot of time treating the drums on this song. I really treat the drums on every song because in musician land, I'm actually a drummer first. You know, vocalist is probably what I'd say first, but vocals, drums were, you know, my first instrument I was competent at. And so a lot of times I'm really picky about drum sounds, and in this one I was in particular as well. So drums kick this off. Pretty decent choir sound there. Simple. You pretty much only get vowels on choir sounds with choir sample kits like the one that I have. I know there are nicer ones out there. You can get ones that do a lot more dynamic things than what I have. But again, I pretty much at this point am sticking with what I've got because I have so many instruments at this point that I just kind of want to stick with this as opposed to buying a zillion more, because you can get into that treadmill forever of constantly chasing the sound. But in this case, I had my odds and E's and I used them. Really also, everything about this song for me was about big. So the vocals are normally pretty big. In particular on this one, you know, because the vocal track was more screamy than my normal vocal tracks, I really wanted it to punch you in the face. And it does at this point. Sorry, I'm getting texts. So I have to make sure that I'm responding appropriately. So, I'm going to answer this real quick. So, big is what I'm going for. That's really the theme of this song for the most part. The most important thing to me is that this sounds particularly big. It does that from a vocal perspective as well. And so the vocals really come in hot.
Let's go to war. I think you'd like it. It's just the perfect thing to feed your insanity. Let's go to war. I think you want it just by listening to the
And so for me, this is the feature part of the song. Again, kind of similar to Factory and Mud and some of the other ones. I really love the string part in this, which is what escalates the song for me. There's also choir in this chorus right here. But for me, really getting these strings right, instead of using session strings for this one, I used the Factory Library Ensemble, which has some differences in expressions and accentuations, which determine how the strings sound. So in this, I leveraged those a bit more than I had in session strings. And so really went for a more cinematic style string here.
I'm the one who wanted to love. Shame you. I'm the one who wanted to love you. To actually forget the thing.
One thing you'll probably notice about this that happens in some of my tracks too is I intentionally leave some things off of being perfectly quantized. Like when you listen to that string alone, it sounds almost kind of silly because there's a couple of notes that are off quantized. Most of that's intentional though, to fit with the guitar and bass piece that I'm doing in this point. So when it's mixed with the rest of the track, it doesn't necessarily sound as far off. But in this case, that's kind of why there's some of those notes. So that's kind of the feel that I'm going for there.
I'm the one who wanted to love you. To actually forget the things that you did to shame you. Thankfully, words aren't bullets or I'd be dead.
So again, just going for a really big effect right there. Pretty straightforward. Choir supporting the string section, which to me is the most important thing that's going on in that section, outside of the vocals, obviously, but even probably more so than the vocals to me. So let's get into the end. So then it kind of collapses on itself.
Since the future requires us to grow. What's this?
So a couple of things that I do there to try to keep things jarring, and you're going to hear